Listen closely, young ones, to a tale that still sends tremors through the stars. A story whispered among the elder races with fear, passed down through generations as a warning. This is not a fable of glory nor a simple recounting of conquest. This is the tale of humanity's awakening, the moment the galaxy learned that the creatures from the third planet were not to be trifled with. Gather near, for I speak of the 12 and the millions that followed them into oblivion. The Harmony Delegation was supposed to represent the pinnacle of human diplomatic achievement. 12 of Earth's finest minds, selected after years of preparation following the discovery of the subspace beacon at the edge of the solar system. Dr. Eleanor Frost, Ambassador Zhao Wei, Cultural Liaison Kamoa Kello, names now etched in memorial platinum across 100 worlds, led the mission to establish humanity's first formal contact with the galactic community. Their journey ended 72 hours after arrival at the Vex'Tharil diplomatic station orbiting Proxima Centauri b. The official recording, later broadcast across every screen on Earth, showed the human delegation entering the Grand Chamber to meet the Vex'Tharil representatives, smiles, extended hands, and then, without warning or apparent provocation, energy weapons discharged. 12 humans collapsed. The recording ended. The Vex'Tharil Emperor, Supreme Radiance Cratax XVIII, issued what the aliens considered a magnanimous statement. The primitive species has been evaluated and found unsuitable for inclusion in galactic affairs. Their delegation exhibited signs of potential contamination. The matter is closed. The matter, as it turned out, was anything but closed. In the stunned silence that followed on Earth, as governments scrambled and populations panicked, a priority message arrived at a small cabin in the mountains of what had once been called Colorado. The cabin's occupant, a gray-haired man with eyes that had seen too much of war, read the message exactly once before burning it in his fireplace. Then Commander Thorne Blackwood retired, packed a single bag and walked out of a life he had built over 15 careful years. Thorne Blackwood had not spoken at a United Earth Council meeting in over a decade. The last time had been to tender his resignation after the Nigerian resource conflict, an affair that had ended with victory but at costs he refused to accept. Now he stood before the semicircular table of 30 representatives, his weathered face illuminated by the harsh lights meant to intimidate those who addressed the council. The council chamber itself was a testament to humanity's contradictions. Built deep beneath the Swiss Alps for security, yet featuring a magnificent holographic ceiling displaying real-time images of the sky above. Steel and concrete bunker mentality married to aspirational transparency. It was exactly the kind of paradox that had defined human history, reaching for the stars while digging defensive trenches. "You all remember me," Blackwood said without preamble. "Some of you despise me, most of you fear me. I don't care about either sentiment. You've called me here because Dr. Eleanor Frost was my wife's sister, and because you think I'll enact your revenge for you." He let his gaze drift over the assembled representatives, political appointees, former military officers, corporate liaisons thinly disguised as humanitarian advocates. He recognized most, though some faces were new since his time. Councillor Yamamoto had been a young diplomat when Blackwood last saw him. Now his hair was streaked with silver. Councillor Mbeki had opposed every military action Blackwood had ever proposed. And there, at the far end, Councillor Schmidt, the woman who had personally delivered news of Eleanor's appointment to the Harmony Delegation, beaming with pride at the time. Councillor Yamamoto leaned forward. "Commander Blackwood, we face an existential threat from a technologically superior—" "Let me stop you there," Blackwood interrupted, a thin smile appearing. "I watched the same recording you did. I saw their weapons, their station design, their defensive capabilities. The Vex'Tharil are approximately 80 years ahead of us in energy weaponry, 200 in propulsion technology, but at least 50 years behind us in computational systems and information warfare." He placed a worn leather satchel on the podium. "They're not gods. They're just aliens who made a terrible miscalculation." "Which was?" asked Councillor Mbeki. Blackwood's smile vanished. "They should have killed us all. Instead, they killed 12 of us and thought that was enough." The room fell silent as he opened his satchel and removed a tablet. I've spent the past 72 hours developing the initial framework for a response. I'm calling it Operation Righteous Fury. Phase 1 can begin within 14 days. I'll need complete autonomy, black budget authorization, and access to the Titan supercomputer array. You're proposing war against a galactic empire, said Councillor Schmidt, her voice tight with disbelief, based on what we've seen of their technology. And not proposing war, Councillor, Blackwood corrected, his voice suddenly soft in a way that made several council members shift uncomfortably. War implies there's a scenario where we might lose. What I'm proposing is punishment, swift, terrible, and absolute. He tapped his tablet and a holographic display appeared above the council table, complex schematics and operational details scrolling past too quickly to follow. The Vex'Tharil have existed for thousands of years. They've grown comfortable, arrogant. They saw humanity as an annoying child, one to be disciplined and dismissed. Blackwood's eyes reflected the scrolling data, giving him a momentarily inhuman appearance. But we're not children. We're the nightmare they never saw coming. The Vex'Tharil Empire spanned 27 star systems, with a population exceeding 14 billion spread across 42 worlds and 300 space habitats. They had evolved from pack predators on a resource-scarce world, developing a rigid, hierarchical society that valued order above all. Their bodies resembled elongated humanoids with iridescent scale-like skin and 4 upper limbs, the lower pair used primarily for delicate manipulation. Adult Vex'Tharil stood approximately 2.5 meters tall, their frame supported by a semi-rigid internal structure that was neither fully skeleton nor exoskeleton, but an evolutionary compromise between the two. Their scales shifted color based on social status, emotional state, and atmospheric conditions, a trait that made deception nearly impossible within their species, and had shaped their cultural development in profound ways. They communicated through a combination of vocalizations, color shifts, and pheromones, making their language extraordinarily difficult for other species to fully master. Their homeworld, Cretaxia Prime, orbited a yellow dwarf star in what humans would later designate the Cygnus arm of the Milky Way. It was a world of vast mineral wealth but limited organic resources, a crucible that had forged their species into methodical expansionists who approached resource extraction with religious reverence. Every Vex'Tharil child learned from birth that waste was the ultimate sin and efficiency the highest virtue. For over 8 centuries they had been the dominant power in their arm of the galaxy, incorporating 11 minor species into their empire, some through diplomacy, others through calculated displays of overwhelming force, followed by generous terms of surrender. The formula had worked flawlessly until they encountered humans. Supreme Radiance Cretax XVIII had personally authorized the termination of the human delegation after receiving the xenopsychology report. The humans showed dangerous unpredictability, emotional decision-making, and, worst of all, a history of internal violence that suggested they could never be trustworthy members of the galactic community. Better to end the relationship immediately than risk contamination. 3 standard months after the incident, Cretax was reviewing expansion plans for the Empire's coreward territories when his Grand Vizier, Vex'More, entered the Imperial chamber without announcement. A breach of protocol so severe that Cretax's guards immediately moved to intercept. "Forgive the intrusion, Radiance," Vex'More gasped, his upper limbs performing the gesture of urgent supplication. "Our outpost at Helios 9 has gone silent. All 20,000 inhabitants, no distress signal, no warning, simply silence." Cretax dismissed the disturbance with a flick of his secondary limbs. "A communications failure. Send a technical team." "We did, Radiance." The scout ship reported the outpost intact but devoid of life before it too went silent. Vex'More's voice dropped to a whisper. "And now we've lost contact with 3 mining colonies in the same sector. Pirates? The Zocti Collective, perhaps?" Cretax's irritation was giving way to the first stirrings of concern. "The Collective has sent us an emergency communication denying involvement and requesting information. They've lost outposts as well." Vex'More hesitated. "There is something else. A message. encoded in our own military frequencies. It repeats on a loop at each location where we lose contact. What message? It says 12 names. Remember them, followed by the designations of the humans we evaluated. For the first time in his 300-cycle rule, Supreme Radiance Krathath felt something ancient and primal stir in his genetic memory, something his ancestors would have recognized immediately as fear. Blackwood's team assembled in an abandoned mining facility beneath the lunar surface, far from official channels and monitoring systems. He had selected them personally, ignoring rank, status, and in some cases criminal records. The only qualification that mattered was exceptional ability coupled with the right kind of anger. The facility had once been Lunar's primary helium-3 processing center before more efficient extraction methods made it obsolete. Now its cavernous main chamber, carved directly from the moon's bedrock, housed a makeshift command center bristling with salvaged and experimental technology. The air smelled of ozone and recycled oxygen, and the low lunar gravity gave everyone's movements an unsettling lightness that only emphasized the deadly serious nature of their work. Dr. Imani Okoro, formerly the youngest ever head of the Quantum Computing Initiative before a scandal involving unauthorized AI research ended her career. She had lost her brother, cultural liaison Kamau Okello, on the Harmony Delegation. Okoro moved with precise efficiency, her fingers dancing across holographic interfaces as she constructed digital weapons more devastating than any bomb. The deep circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights, fueled by grief and stimulants. Major Felix Reyes, court-martialed after disobeying orders to abandon civilians in a combat zone. His unconventional tactical approaches had been deemed recklessly effective by his superiors. Reyes was built like a concrete bunker, solid, scarred, and purposeful. He kept a small wooden carving of St. Michael in his pocket, occasionally running his thumb over it when he thought no one was looking. Zhu Meiling, the infamous ghost in the machine, a hacker whose infiltration of 17 secure networks had made her the most wanted cybercriminal on 3 continents before Blackwood offered her an alternative to lifetime imprisonment. Small and wiry, with a shock of blue hair and neural interface ports visible at her temples, she approached digital systems like an artist approaching a canvas, with reverence and creative malice. Lieutenant Astrid Jurgensen, expert in xenolinguistics and cryptography, dishonorably discharged for accessing classified information on alien biological systems. Tall and Nordic pale, with augmented eyes that shifted color based on light conditions, she had been the first to fully decode the Vex'Tharil language from intercepted transmissions. "This isn't a military operation," Blackwood told them during their first briefing. "It's not a sanctioned action with rules of engagement. What we're doing doesn't have a name in conventional warfare." "Vengeance works for me," said Reyes, cleaning his fingernails with a combat knife. "Vengeance is emotional, imprecise." Blackwood activated the holographic display. "This is about mathematics. They took 12 of ours. The proportional response would be 12 of theirs, but that equation doesn't account for the disparity in our respective populations, nor for the message we need to send." Dr. Okoro tilted her head. "What's the calculation?" "The Vex'Tharil must lose enough of their population to remember this lesson for 1,000 years, Blackwood replied, his voice clinical. "But not so many that they can't spread the warning to others." "You're talking about genocide," Jorgensen said quietly. "No." Blackwood's eyes flashed. "Genocide would be eliminating their species. That's not our goal. Our goal is to teach a lesson that the galaxy will never forget." He manipulated the display to show the Vex'Tharil communication network. "Thanks to Dr. Okoro's work with the Titan array, we now have complete access to their systems. Phase 1 was information gathering. Phase 2 begins today." The display shifted to show a small outpost designated Helios 9. "We start small," Blackwood continued. "1 outpost, 20,000 Vex'Tharil, and a message." Meiling frowned at the display. "What's the vector? Biological? Explosive?" "Nothing so crude," Blackwood replied. We're going to turn their own automated defense systems against them. The station's environmental controls, security protocols, maintenance robots, all will receive contradictory emergency orders simultaneously. In the ensuing chaos, emergency bulkheads will seal, atmosphere will be vented, and defense turrets will target anything that moves. He looked at each team member in turn. Make no mistake about what we're doing. This is not a traditional war. This is a slaughter. If any of you can't live with that, leave now. No one moved. Excellent. Blackwood nodded. Let's get to work. I want that outpost dark within 48 hours. The Vex'Tharil Military High Command gathered in their secure bunker deep beneath the Imperial capital. Emergency protocols had been activated, fleets recalled from frontier territories, and planetary defense grids placed on highest alert. Still, the reports continued to arrive with terrifying regularity. Another outpost gone silent, another colony found empty, another military installation destroying itself from within. The pattern is expanding exponentially, reported Fleet Commander Vex'Tharil, her scales dulled with stress. Whatever weapon they're using, it's spreading through our communication networks faster than we can isolate the affected systems. Impossible, snarled Defense Minister Vex. These are primitive beings. Their ships can barely achieve light speed. They have no presence beyond their home system. Evidently, said Grand Vizier Vex'More dryly, our intelligence was flawed. The holographic display in the center of the chamber updated with real-time casualty figures. The number had just passed 1 million. They're focusing on military and government targets, observed Intelligence Director Thexvor. Civilian populations are largely unaffected except in mixed habitations. This suggests precision rather than indiscriminate destruction. How reassuring, Vex'More muttered. They're murdering us with surgical precision. The chamber's secure communication system suddenly activated without authorization. The screens around the room flickered, then displayed a single human face. Weathered, grey-haired, with eyes that seemed to look through each Vex'Tharil present. I am Commander Thorne Blackwood of Earth, the human said without preamble. You know why this is happening. The Vex'Tharil leaders stared in stunned silence at this unprecedented breach of their most secure facility. Every 3 hours, another Vex'Tharil installation will be eliminated until Supreme Radiance Kratax the 18th personally appears on this channel to discuss terms. Blackwood's expression remained neutral, as if discussing the weather. Current time is 1427 Earth Standard. I'll expect his radiance at 1727. The screen went dark. Defense Minister Vex recovered first. Trace that signal. I want planetary bombardment of its origin point immediately. The signal came from inside this room, Minister, Intelligence Director Thexvor said quietly, specifically from your personal communication implant. That was unnecessarily theatrical, Dr. Akaru commented as Blackwood terminated the connection. Psychological warfare is still warfare, Blackwood replied, leaning back in his chair aboard the stealth vessel Nemesis. The ship, officially decommissioned years earlier, had been recommissioned under deep black budget authorization and extensively modified with technology reverse-engineered from the Vex'Tharil communication beacon. They need to understand that there's nowhere they can hide from us. The Nemesis had once been an experimental stealth destroyer designed to test adaptive camouflage technology against orbital defense systems. Now it served as the mobile headquarters for Operation Righteous Fury, hovering in geosynchronous orbit above the Vex'Tharil capital world. Its original weapons systems had been removed to make room for the massive Titan uplink and the most powerful signal intelligence package ever constructed by human hands. From the outside, the ship appeared as nothing more than a slightly darker patch against the backdrop of space, its hull coated with light-absorbing metamaterials and sensor-deflecting geometries. Inside, it was a labyrinth of cramped corridors and repurposed compartments, every available surface covered with equipment or displays. The bridge, where Blackwood and his team now gathered, had been expanded into what had once been the officers' mess hall. Cracks won't appear, Major Reyes predicted, checking the targeting solutions for the next wave of attacks. His species psychology suggests he'll see it as capitulation. I'm counting on it, Blackwood said. Each refusal justifies escalation. Mei Ling worked at a console physically separated from the ship's main systems, a quarantine measure for her more experimental intrusion techniques. Her fingers moved in a blur over the holographic interface, neural implants allowing her to process information at speeds that bordered on the superhuman. "Their information security is actually quite sophisticated," she commented, eyes never leaving her display. "Just predictable. They build perfect fortresses with doors that always open the same way." A thin smile crossed her face. "I prefer to make my own doors." Lieutenant Jurgensen monitored the Vex'Tharil communication networks, her augmented eyes rapidly shifting between green and amber as she processed the incoming data streams. "Their civilian channels are in chaos, religious leaders are calling it divine punishment, military commanders are blaming each other. There's already talk of surrendering to the human demons." "Good," Blackwood said coldly. "Fear is contagious. Let it spread." The ship's main display showed the Vex'Tharil home system, with population centers highlighted. Tactical overlays indicated the cascading failures of their defense systems, communications, and infrastructure. It was a masterpiece of information warfare. The Titan supercomputer array had processed their entire civilization's worth of data in days, identifying every vulnerability and exploiting them in perfect sequence. Mei Ling looked up from her console. "We've gained access to their central banking system. All military accounts are now being drained to civilian relief organizations. Their economy will collapse within days." "Good," Blackwood nodded. "And the package?" "Delivered to the Imperial Palace subsystems," confirmed Lieutenant Jorgensen. "All we need is the activation command." The package was perhaps Blackwood's most elegant weapon, an evolving algorithm that would systematically corrupt the Vex'Tharil genetic database on which their entire caste system and governmental structure relied. With a single command, the entire Imperial lineage would be erased from their records, throwing their rigid social hierarchy into chaos. At precisely 1727 Earth Standard Time, the display remained empty. No Supreme Radiance appeared to discuss terms. 3 hours, Blackwood said simply. "Prepare the next target." By the 6th deadline, the death toll had reached 5 million. The Vex'Tharil economy had collapsed. 3 planetary governments had declared independence from the Empire in desperate attempts to disassociate themselves from Krithak's policies. The Imperial fleet was in disarray, with commanders unable to trust their own systems or, increasingly, each other. When the communication system activated at the 7th deadline, it wasn't Blackwood who appeared on screen, but a human woman in formal diplomatic attire. "I am Undersecretary Helena Chen, speaking on behalf of the United Earth Government," she announced to the haggard Vex'Tharil leadership. "Commander Blackwood has been instructed to pause operations for 12 hours to allow for diplomatic discussion." Supreme Radiance Krithaks, who had finally been persuaded to attend by his increasingly desperate advisors, leaned forward. His once brilliant scales had dulled to a sickly grey. "We acknowledge your communication, Earth representative." "Let me be clear," Chen continued, her voice precision-engineered to convey absolute authority. "This pause is not mercy, it is not hesitation. It is simply an opportunity for you to prevent further destruction through complete and unconditional surrender." Krithak's upper limbs trembled with a mixture of rage and fear. "The Vex'Tharil Empire has stood for 8 centuries. We do not." "The Vex'Tharil Empire no longer exists in any meaningful way," Chen interrupted. "Your economy is destroyed, your military is neutralized, your population is in revolt. These are not threats, Supreme Radiance. These are simply facts." The human transmitted a document. "These are our terms. You have 12 hours to sign and implement them, or Commander Blackwood will resume operations with our full authorization." After the transmission ended, Grand Vizier Vex'More turned to his Emperor. "Radiance, we must consider a capitulation, surrender to primitives," Krithaks hissed. "I would rather die with dignity." "With all respect, Radiance," Intelligence Director Thexvor said, "you would not be the one dying. Millions more of our people would die for your dignity." The terms were brutally simple. public acknowledgement of the murder of the 12 human diplomats, complete demilitarization of all Vex'Tharil territories, unrestricted access for human observers to all Vex'Tharil technology and research, substantial reparations, and perhaps most humiliating, the installation of human-controlled override systems in all Vex'Tharil technology to ensure compliance. "They're not destroying us," Vex'More observed quietly. "They're domesticating us." 12 hours later, the Vex'Tharil Empire surrendered unconditionally to a species they had encountered less than a year earlier. The signing ceremony was broadcast across every communication medium in known space. The ceremony took place in neutral territory, a massive, transparent domed structure hastily erected on a barren moon in the Proxima Centauri system, not far from where the Harmony Delegation had been murdered. The location was Blackwood's choice, a pointed reminder of where the path to this moment had begun. Supreme Radiance Krithax arrived with a small delegation of advisors, their scales dull to a uniform grey that, in Vex'Tharil culture, signified profound disgrace. They moved with the stiffness of those who expected imminent death. In contrast, the human delegation, led by Undersecretary Chen, entered with calm, measured confidence. Armed guards flanked the humans, their weapons conspicuously inactive but present. The treaty document itself was a masterpiece of diplomatic brutality. 27 pages of meticulously detailed terms that would effectively end Vex'Tharil autonomy while preserving the illusion of their continued sovereignty. Human advisors would be installed in every level of Vex'Tharil government. Human technicians would have unrestricted access to all Vex'Tharil technology. Human educators would revise Vex'Tharil historical records to include full accounts of their error in judgment regarding the Harmony Delegation. When Krithax's hand trembled as he reached for the signing stylus, Undersecretary Chen leaned forward. "For what it's worth," she said in a voice pitched only for the Supreme Radiance's hearing, "Commander Blackwood advocated for your complete extermination. This treaty represents our mercy." The Supreme Radiance's scales flickered briefly with a pattern that even the advanced translators couldn't interpret, some emotion too complex or too ancient in Vex'Tharil evolution to have a human equivalent. Then he signed. Blackwood watched the transmission from the observation deck of the Nemesis, his expression unreadable. "Is it enough?" Dr. Arcolo asked, joining him by the viewport that showed the glittering lights of the Vex'Tharil homeworld below. "It's never enough," Blackwood replied softly. "Eleanor is still dead. So are the others. Nothing brings them back." "Then why stop? We could eliminate their entire species now. They have no defenses left." Blackwood turned to her. "Because the mission was never about eliminating them. It was about sending a message to the galaxy. This is what happens when you kill humans. That message has been received." He gestured toward distant stars. "Every species within communication range is watching. They're learning. That's the real victory." In the following months, humanity expanded rapidly into space using Vex'Tharil technology and resources. The United Earth government established diplomatic relations with 11 other species, all of whom approached with extreme caution and elaborate displays of respect. None mentioned the Vex'Tharil situation directly, but the knowledge hung in the air of every diplomatic exchange. The second wave of human expansion was unlike anything witnessed in galactic history. Within 2 years, colonies had been established in 17 star systems. Vex'Tharil ships, refitted with human crews and control systems, carried Earth's ambassadors to distant worlds. The message was clear. Humans had not only defeated a vastly more advanced empire, but had seamlessly appropriated their technology and improved upon it. On the Vex'Tharil homeworld, the transformation was equally dramatic. Human cultural missions established themselves in major population centers, ostensibly to promote mutual understanding, but functioning primarily as intelligence-gathering operations, and visible reminders of the new power dynamic. Young Vex'Tharil, their scales still bright with adolescent coloration, could be seen adopting human mannerisms, clothing styles, even attempting human expressions, a cultural assimilation that horrified the older generations. One unexpected development was the emergence of what became known as the contrition movement, among certain Vex'Tharil communities. Led by a lower-caste philosopher who took the name 12 Rememberer, these Vex'Tharil publicly renounced their species' actions against the Harmony Delegation and adopted an almost religious devotion to human ethical frameworks. They established shrines to the 12 murdered diplomats and engaged in elaborate rituals of atonement that sometimes lasted for days. Human anthropologists observed these developments with fascination and unease. Dr. Marina Volkov, in her seminal paper, Conquest Without Occupation, The Psychological Dimensions of Earth's First Interstellar War, noted that humanity has achieved something unprecedented in colonial history. We have conquered not just territory or resources, but the very self-perception of another species. Supreme Radiance Krithax eventually took his own life rather than live under human oversight. He was not mourned. His successor, a reformist from a previously minor bloodline, worked diligently to rebuild Vex'Tharil society under the new constraints. Blackwood declined all honors and recognition, disappearing back to his cabin in the mountains. Before leaving, he visited the Memorial of the 12 in Geneva, a simple arrangement of 12 pillars of light reaching into the sky, each bearing the name and image of one of the murdered diplomats. The memorial had been constructed in what was once Ariana Park, adjacent to the old United Nations complex. Its design was deliberately minimalist, 12 columns of pure light extending from circular platforms of polished black stone, arranged in a pattern that, when viewed from above, formed a constellation matching no known star system. This new constellation symbolized humanity's emergence onto the galactic stage. At night, the light pillars were visible for hundreds of kilometers, a beacon that burned perpetually as both remembrance and warning. Blackwood arrived at dusk, when the day's crowds had thinned but before the evening rush of visitors. He moved slowly among the pillars, his steps heavy with the weight of memory and action. At each pillar he paused briefly, acknowledging each of the 12 by name in a personal ritual of respect. He saved Eleanor's pillar for last. Dr. Eleanor Frost had been a xenobiologist specializing in non-carbon-based life forms, her work on theoretical alien biology having laid much of the groundwork for humanity's first contact protocols. Her pillar displayed not only her formal diplomatic portrait, but also a holographic representation of her most significant research findings. Blackwood stood for a long time before it, his weathered face illuminated by the soft blue light. A passing tourist, not recognizing him, asked if he had known her. She believed in peaceful contact between species, Blackwood replied, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to express. She thought the stars would unite us, not divide us. The night before she left on the mission, we argued about it. I told her she was being naive. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She called me a professional pessimist. She was wrong, though, wasn't she? The tourist said. After what happened? Blackwood looked up at the endless reach of the light pillar, extending up into the darkening sky where the first stars were becoming visible. In those distant pinpoints of light were worlds forever changed by his actions. Millions dead, an empire brought to its knees, a galaxy's perception of humanity fundamentally altered, all because 12 lives had been deemed expendable by an alien emperor who couldn't comprehend the consequences. No, he said finally, she wasn't wrong. She was just ahead of her time. As darkness fell completely, Blackwood placed a single object at the base of Eleanor's memorial, a small data crystal containing the complete operational records of Operation Righteous Fury. Every decision, every target, every death. The unvarnished truth of what had been done in the name of the 12. It was his own form of contrition, an acknowledgement that vengeance, however justified, carried its own weight. Then he walked away, a solitary figure gradually swallowed by darkness, leaving the 12 pillars of light to stand eternal vigil against the night. And so, young ones, the legend of the 12 and the millions entered the great history of the stars. The humans, once dismissed as primitive and inconsequential, became a power that even the eldest races approached with cautious respect. Their reputation spread faster than their actual presence. a shadow larger than the creature that cast it. Some say Commander Blackwood still lives, unnaturally extended by technologies gleaned from a dozen subjugated worlds. Others claim he was merely a construct, a fearsome persona created to embody humanity's wrath. The truth, as with many legends, lies somewhere between. What remains certain is the lesson: humanity will not tolerate aggression against its own. They may quarrel endlessly among themselves, but against an outside threat they unite with terrible purpose. To harm one is to face the wrath of all. Remember this tale when you journey to the stars, and should you encounter the descendants of Earth, tread carefully, for they have never forgotten the 12, nor what they did to avenge them.